Well, we have a heated debate inside Greece. It's going to be a tough 6 months if at the end we will have a finalized agreement that will be more officially...
6 months in the future?
6 months in the future, yes, of course, because of all the procedure that must be followed during the next 5 or 6 months. Ratification in Macedonian parliament, ratification in Greek parliament in the end of these 6 months, and in between there have to be a few very important moves on both sides, with the most critical one, the referendum in your country.
Well, I think that first of all, I think that in Athens they expect that the parliament in Skopje will ratify the agreement so that then a process can be initiated so that Greece can send letters of agreement actually both to NATO and the EU, so that Greece gives its consent to both organizations for invitation to NATO and a date for accession talks in the EU. This will probably be the easy part. I think that then we should expect maybe a short period of calmness until the lead comes back in Skopje with the referendum, the initiation of possible constitutional change, because according to the information we both have, and I guess you also have, at least to ratify NATO membership, referendum has to be finalized here and the constitution change process has to start. I think that the current Greek government will search for more votes in the parliament, because, as you probably know, there is a rift between the two partners, senior coalition partner and junior coalition partner. This will be probably a difficult process, while at the same time the opposition will accuse the coalition government in Athens that there's no unified stance between Syriza and independent Greeks. Well, I think there are some elements of the agreement that they are difficult for the opposition to swallow. They mostly have to do with the identity and language that is going to be actually selected and how it's going to be written down in the agreement. You know that New Democracy is has a power base in northern Greece, and these are issues very sensitive there. So as long as there are elections sometime down the road, nobody knows that they're going to be in next autumn or in January or maybe next May, they believe that they cannot afford to lose any votes. So this is critical for them, and this will be a guidance to their future behavior.
I generally agree with what Angelo just said. I think that the opposition just wanted to keep its electorate solid. Nea Demokratia has a big power base in the north, and it also is the Conservative Party, which supposedly is much more sensitive on the so-called national issues. So since austerity is not so debatable because of the programs and the general obligations of Greece against its creditors, this is probably one certain issue, one certain topic that the opposition, the conservative opposition, can distinguish itself from the government, which is left, socialist, you name it, I haven't decided. I think that the Conservative Party will keep it high in the agenda of criticism against the government. So it will be, no matter how the things are going to proceed, whether we have a final agreement and an end game on the agreement, or no agreement at all, or failure of the agreement in some part of all this long process, I think that the conservative opposition will keep it very high on its agenda against the government.
Mr. Kamenos' party has a very strong national ideological core. That means that they are very sensitive to what Vasilis mentioned as national issues. National issues being the name issue, Greek-Turkish affairs, and the Cyprus issue. So maybe after a certain point it was easy to him to say yes in signing MOUs and austerity measures, but this is the last line of defense for him. So if he wants to get re-elected, he cannot totally alienate his so-called nationalist base. The interesting thing here is that he now, at the time being, he says that he's not going to lift his confidence in the government, and at the same time he said that he's not going to vote for an agreement. Of course, this is contradiction in terms, but this is also part of politics. I think that maybe this suits also the Prime Minister, because if an agreement comes to the Greek Parliament for ratification in October, then certain other difficult issues will be overcome, like discussions on debt relief and the exit from the austerity program in 20th of August. So you have to combine all this. There's also a theory that the government, Syriza, actually used the name issue to search for a different majority in the parliament. To make like an opening to more progressive center-left forces. Not very easy to prove it. Usually you judge this by the result that you have in the end. But it seems, for me, certain that it was impossible for the Prime Minister not to expect that Mr. Kamenos would have reservations on this issue. So it was a risky bet, maybe a calculated risky bet, but still a bet.
Well, I hope that it will be a fair agreement and something that can be defended on both countries, because in the ensuing period, both governments will have to find a way of selling the agreement in their internal audience. Both governments have elections in the following period. Both oppositions have interests on criticizing their government for a bad agreement, for what they will claim to be a bad agreement, or an agreement against the national interests. So I guess that the political game within the two countries from now on is going to be the factor that will actually judge the success of the diplomatic agreement between the two countries. Of course, if you're asking me on a personal level, probably we shouldn't have to wait for all these years, but we have to take into consideration, and I can speak for the Greek part at least for now, 1991 Greece, after the fall of Yugoslavia and the dissolution of Yugoslavia and creation of all these independent states, new independent states that were within the Federation of Yugoslavia, found Greece absolutely unaware of what was going north of its borders in what we understood as being the Iron Curtain, behind the Iron Curtain. So trying to compare things today and things in 1991 and 92 is a little bit problematic. So I would say that things maybe took some time, but right now the conditions are mature, are much better for a compromise. At the time, probably it wasn't. Of course, all these things are also find their historical criticism, and we're not historians to make this kind of estimations right now. But let's see the final agreement and get back to it.
The polls are not encouraging. This is the truth. I think there is a certain percentage of 30–35% which would like to see this problem solved. But the problem with the name issue is that it's a very sentimentally charged issue, and you can very easily criticize and see this issue under black or white terms. Sometimes it's also difficult to explain certain technical details, for example, why the language should stay the same or not. But it's very easy to be exploited. This is what will be one of the factors which will judge the final result, I think. Listen, there's a theory which says that after 10 years of severe economic crisis, Greece does not have the luxury to appear defeated in an issue like this. Then there's another theory that this is more sensitive for northern Greece and less sensitive for other areas in Greece. I think both of these theories have elements of truth in them. And the first applies to this sentimental issue I mentioned before. Many consider the issue not so important, but they want to save face. So maybe they believe that by holding a tough stance on this, it saves face.